Welcome to Generationally Speaking. I am Reverend Irene Smith, and today I have with me my co-host Kimberly Leonard and my co-host Minister James Durham. But today we're going to feature Minister James Durham, and I am excited about this young man's story. I met him at the church where we both labor, where we both worship, and in getting to know this young man, I learned so much about him. You know, the old folks say you can't judge a book by its cover. But when I looked at this cover, I thought something totally different. What I saw was a preppy young man. But when I spoke with him and I listened to his life story, man, my heart was moved. And I thought, I've got to allow him to share his story with our television audience. And so Kim and I, we're here today and we're going to be asking him a few questions as he shares with us his life story. I do believe that his story will bless some young man. I believe that his story will be a blessing to some grandmother who's raising her grandchildren. I believe that his story will be a blessing to some pastor who's looking in, wondering how and what I can do to impact and what can I say to my youth. I believe that his story will impact some mother who's struggling and wondering, you know, is she doing the right thing for her son? And so today I just ask you to listen in and of course send us your feedback. We're always happy to receive your feedback. And so we're just going to jump right in and I'm going to allow him to introduce himself, and we're going to start in his formative years, his early years. All right, Minister Durham.
I'm James Durham. I am born and raised in Washington, D.C. Right now, I am a husband of 11 years, best friend of 23 years, father of the 18-year-old daughter who's on her way to college. A little bit about my background. So I come up in the slums of Washington, D.C. I grew up in a neighborhood called Sursum Quarters. At the time I grew up there, it was one of the worst neighborhoods in this country, I would say. You know, a lot of just bad things there. Grew up with my grandmother, my mother, my brother, god brother, and a host of other individuals from time to time. My home, not a house, we lived in an apartment. It was the neighborhood home. My mother was the neighborhood mom, so there would be times I would be on punishment and I couldn't play my games, but my friends would be there playing my games, and I'm using the encyclopedia to do book reports as punishment. But that's just a little bit. I mean, there's so much I can say.
So let's talk a little bit about Sursum Quarters. I know that I'm from Georgia, and I moved here from there to work. And we were told about a lot of different neighborhoods. And Sursum Quarters was one of those neighborhoods that I learned about that was a neighborhood that was riddled with violence, drug issues, and many other problems. So being raised in that neighborhood, for you as a child, I'm sure you probably didn't see it from that perspective.
Right. I didn't. For me, growing up was fun. It's a lot of fun. I didn't have much structure. So as an elementary school student, I would be outside till 1 in the morning, hanging out with the older guys, the drug dealers in the neighborhood, and my friends. I was not restrained to that neighborhood. I remember there was a time when one of the times my father would come looking for me, and I was like way out in Georgetown somewhere. We would ride our bikes, we'd get on the subway. So for me, I didn't see it as bad. I saw it as a lot of fun. I had fun, went to school. I wasn't a great student up until I left the school. I went to Walker Jones Elementary. So that was all fun, and the neighborhood was all fun, even in the midst of the bad things. So my friends, and not just my friends' house, my house. We go to the house and, you know, we sitting and we hanging out with the roaches and the dirt and crack valves and all of this. But it doesn't register to you as this is not normal.
Right. Right. So that not registering to you as not normal, and then, as you said, being able to stay out as late as you wanted to. The question is asked, well, why did your parents, your mom, your grandmother, why is it they didn't put restraints on you? You know, that why didn't they require you to be home at certain times?
Well, one thing about where I grew up, it was a community.
Okay.
So when I would get in trouble in school and I got home, my grandmother and my mother would already know. I remember a few times where I got a few beatings on the way home from the neighborhood. Um, while it was violent, it was rough. It's just like, oh well, he's out with his big brother, he's out with his god brother, and so my god brother hung in a very bad circle. It was very popular. I mean, I don't want to put names out there,
Right.
but he was a part of big time rings,
Mm-hmm.
and so I had the protection.
Right.
And so it's like wherever I was, I knew not just kids my age, I knew the adults, the bad adults, the good adults, and so I guess it was always just understanding of he's protected,
Right.
he's
So-
covered.
So as a kid, I also grew up in D.C. I grew up in Southeast D.C. off of Alabama Avenue. Like every year we moved, so I can't even say
Okay.
I was in a certain neighborhood. But as a kid, I can bear witness to, as a child, doing things that would be considered abnormal. But it was in a safe environment because everybody looked out for everybody. And we had a level of respect that we don't have today when an adult tells you to do something. Did you have that same type of experience?
It's funny to say that. I would say yes and no. So we looked out for each other, although we fought each other. We looked out for each other, although there was killing. It's tough. I would say yes and no. It's just you. I guess the only way I can put it is we come up in this environment. You're used to being around this. It's not strange. It's not weird. It's not even bad or violent. It's just the way things are. And so we just lived our life. We didn't allow it to cause us to live in fear. We did not live in fear. We did not. Although there were some parents who kept their kids in the house. Don't you go outside, you go to school, and then you come back here or what have you. Yeah, but that wasn't our experience. We just lived our life.
So you went to school, and you said, you know, there were times I was not the best student, and so what happened in the school? Was it the structure that you had a problem with?
Well, teachers were, in my estimation, my opinion, horrible. So the first grade teacher, I was a good student because I had a great teacher, Mrs. Barton. I remember her to this day.
Okay.
I remember even going with my mother shopping for a Christmas gift for Miss Barton. Second grade teacher, I won't call her out by name. I remember her name, but I was a bad student. I talked a lot. She used to have her medicine. She would throw her medicine at me. She had rulers. Like, this was back in the day when they used to beat the kids. So she had like 6 rulers taped together. And not only would she hit me with them, but she would throw them at me. She threw scissors at me. She threw whatever she could get her hand.
My goodness.
Third grade teacher, she was afraid of the class. We ran her. I remember her name as well, but I won't put her name out
was
there.
she African American?
All of these were black teachers.
Okay.
All of my teachers at Walker Jones were black, but other than Miss Barton, the 5th grade teacher, she tried, but she was elderly. She probably was in her 60s, 70s, and so she didn't have the energy. And of course, since we ruled the classroom, there was no teaching going on. So in DC, they give U's and not F's. I remember many years seeing many U's. I don't remember the other grades that I got, but it was more U's than anything. And then I was just put on to the next grade. So
Unfortunately, they do kind of like the same thing now, where they have the No Child Left Behind
Right.
law, and they pass you as opposed to making you repeat.
Right, and I wonder, you know, in that environment, in that school, what I hear is that the teachers were placed in an environment that they were not prepared to teach, and perhaps they didn't bring the energy maybe that was necessary for that.
right. So my 4th grade year, I don't know why, but I had a teacher for math, and she taught. And that's when I began to learn.
Okay. All right. So then you made it through, and you know I know many neighborhoods where where they protect the people in the neighborhood, and they easily identify someone who's not a part of that neighborhood. Even in my little small town, I can remember when people would come from our small town to visit maybe a young lady, and all the guys would know this person doesn't belong here, and they would sort of go after that guy because he was on their territory. Yeah. Yeah. So now you've made your way. You in 5th grade. So what happens in 6th grade, 6th, 7th grade?
So 6th grade, my grandmother made the decision to move us from that neighborhood. So we moved to Suitland, Maryland, and I was put in Shadyside Elementary School, and then I met Dr. Gibbs, who was my teacher there, and I still had the same issues from Walker Jones. My energy was all over the place. And so I remember sitting with her, an advanced reading teacher, and a guidance counselor. And they said, well, we're going to try something different with you. We're going to put you in advanced class because we just think you're not being challenged.
Wow.
And from there, I blossomed. God blessed me with a good mind, and I just flourished. From that, I just had someone who just cared, and they decided to take a different approach and pour into me, and I blossomed from that point.
So they did that, but the question is, it's always the student. So what was it that made you decide you wanted this education? Because before you had the same opportunity, but when you went to this school and they tested you and they said, okay, we think he should be on a higher level, but where was there was no rebellion? I mean, what made you decide this time?
I think it all goes to environment and peer group. So as I said, when I first got to the new elementary school in the 6th grade, I still was me. A lot of energy, and I like to talk. So I talked a lot in class. But then they took me, I was still in that class, but like half of the day they took me out of that class and put me with this advanced group. And it was just, maybe like 7, maybe 14. It was a small group of us. And just being out of that environment into this new environment, my focus began being placed somewhere else, and it was being placed on the work that they put in front of me, and I was like, oh wow, this is cool. I like this. I like learning.
Yeah.
Right. So in elementary school, even though you were not a good student, it sounded like you had picked up the fundamentals that you were able to read.
Oh yes. So again, that came from home. When I was on punishment, every time I was punished living in DC, we had the encyclopedias. I know many of you may not know what encyclopedias are, but I had to do a book report on the encyclopedia. I used to know the Emancipation Proclamation word for word.
Oh my.
Wow.
I knew the Constitution, that word for word, but I knew it front and back because my mother had me to read those things. My mother was a straight A student through school, so she always wanted to, just make sure that I was reading.
Right. So now that gives me great insight because it shows that you had the ability. Your mother laid out a path for you, whether you accepted it. She laid it out. So now you in middle school and you're flourishing. What about your old friends?
Old friends. I traveled back and hung out with my old friends. Created new friends in my new neighborhood. I still was wild. Outside of school, I was wild and crazy. Many people would tell you, "Oh, he's the wildest, craziest person that I know." But in school, it was put in front of me, and I just had that internal. They put a thirst inside of me, and it was just awesome. Like, oh wow, this is just great. I like learning.
Okay.
And
then from high school years, what was that like for you?
So high school years, that was a big transition.
Okay.
So it's more of a transition outside of school than in school. So my grandmother passed away. She was my best friend. My grandmother and I were so close. I cried every day for about 3 weeks straight. And so she died when I was in 6th grade and during that transitional year. And I remember Dr. Gibbs and the counselor. I would be in the counselor's office all day long crying and doing work. And so I bless God for them. I mean, they were great for me in that time. So I moved with my father. I did not live with my father up until that point. I had contentious relationship with my father prior to that. He didn't come around much, and when he did, it was to give me beatings because I was a bad kid or what have you. So I had to learn these two new people, my father and my stepmother, and that was a big struggle because the environment I came from, no structure, did whatever I wanted, but also didn't eat a lot, didn't have a lot of good things. So in this new home, it was structure, rules. You gotta be in the house. You gotta go to bed at this time. What a bedtime! I never heard of that in my life. But they had snacks. I don't think I had snacks in my home prior to that. I remember just being so in awe at getting ice cream with the chocolate syrup to go on it and have Oreo cookies. So, but it was a transition coming from no structure to structure, moving into a blended family. And so there was a struggle between my father and I, my stepmother and I was fighting.
So where was your mom?
So my mom, as I said, I lived with her at first, and then my grandmother moved us away. My mother had a bout where she was on drugs. So during that time, that's why we moved with my grandmother, and then we moved I moved with my father. That was another big thing about that transition. So I lived with my brother all my life up until that point. My brother is 9 years my senior. I look more at him as a fatherly figure than a brother. He's my big brother because he helped to raise me. But he didn't move with my father with me. And so I felt betrayed at that time, and I was like, man, you leaving me here to deal with this by myself. So I had that transition going on. But in school, I was continuing to flourish because God blessed me with teachers that cared every year from that point. So 7th grade year, I had Miss Byrne. I had her 7th and 8th grade year. I had her in advanced classes. So she fed that thirst for knowledge. I had Mr. Morris in my 8th grade. In my 9th grade year, I had Miss McLeod, and I met Mr. Roberts, who I didn't have a class with him, but I just talked to him. He just an adult who developed a relationship with a young person. And that's where I get my passion for working with young people and for pouring into young people. Throughout my life, even going back to living in certain quarters, there was always adults who poured into me, who took the time and talked to me. So I hung around adults. That's why I have an old soul. I act older than I am because I always hung around adults, and them just taking the time to listen to me and just to show that they're concerned. And that did a lot for my maturity. That did a lot for my focus.
So we heard a lot about, you talked about your early years, you talked about your middle school years, your high school years. You talked about your grandmother and your mom and your father and your stepmom. But the question is, when did you meet God?
So I know the exact moment. I was 13 years old. So my brother, he met, this was his first wife, and she got him heavily involved in church. And so they would come over and they would come and get me. This is when I was living with my father, and I would hang out with them, and I loved her dearly. I was 13. She showed me how to drive, so I was driving her car on the road at 13 years old. That's how you get a young person to love you. But they got married that summer, and they took me on their honeymoon with them. Their honeymoon was just going to Tunica, Mississippi, which is where she's from. So we was driving. So from here till we got to Tennessee, we were just having a conversation about God. And her name is Sandy. Sandy was talking to me about God, and she had me reading some scriptures. So I was sitting in the back seat of the car, and I remember being in the mountains in Tennessee, and I felt God sitting with me, talking to me. And then that's where I prayed that prayer, and I believed that, he raised Jesus to die for us on the cross, and he was resurrected that we can have eternal life. And that's when I met God. God had a long conversation with me on that 16-hour trip from here to Tunica, Mississippi. I'll never forget. It was in the mountains of Tennessee where I had my first direct experience with God, and it blew my mind.
Amen. So you met God at what age was that?
13.
So at 13. But you still had some growing. So you met God. Now you decided, okay, this is, in the mountains, everything is golden and good. You're in the car, ain't nobody else around to shake your faith or question you. So when you get back from Mississippi and back to school, Then what?
So coming back from Mississippi, so school wise, I just got better and better. I was a honor roll student in middle school, high school. It was another transition because we moved from where we were. Oh wow, it's so much that I could talk about. So we moved from New Carrollton to Clinton, and I went to Surrattsville. So that 9th grade year was a transition year, but I was a honor roll student. But after that, 10th, 11th grade, I'm like 4.0 and above. I was taking AP classes. I was always heavily involved in sports throughout my life. So in high school, played football, ran track. So school life, relationships was great. I didn't deal with the stuff I used to deal, so there's a lot I left out. So I used to fight every day. And when I was in DC, I had to fight. It wasn't by choice. It's just that's what we did. I boxed and I fought because that's just what happened. Middle school, both years, we used to fight almost every day, but that was by choice, and we fought by neighborhood. So it was a lot of group fights. I was never upset when I was fighting. I never really wanted to fight, but it was just what we did. So
So let's talk, pause there for a minute, because even today we find our young people in schools who are fighting in middle school and in high school. And when you talk to them, it's usually by neighborhood. And I always say to them, I mean, how can you fight by neighborhoods when none of you all had a decision in what neighborhood you were going to live in? So what made this turf of neighborhoods?
I have no idea. Nothing other than the fact that's where we lived, and the group that I connected with, that's just what they did. They fought when they sold drugs.
So when you all fought, I watched, it's unfortunate on Facebook, people put these video clips out of people fighting, and it breaks my heart. It breaks my heart. And I see people in there, it's one thing to fight for a reason, but then when it just seems like no reason. When you all were fighting, were you fighting to really hurt? Were you fighting really to destroy? I mean, did you see this other person as looking like you?
Right. So for some of them, they were fighting to inflict harm and things like that. But throughout that time, I saw that it wasn't me, because I was doing stuff, and even in the midst of doing it, I felt convicted, because I'm like, this is not me. I saw behaviors. One of my friends who later went to prison for rape. I said to him, man, you gonna go to prison for rape? He ended up getting killed in prison, and his brother, who was my best friend, he killed himself when he found out that his brother was killed in prison. But yeah, I knew that wasn't me, but that's just the environment I was in. Also, I said that we all had the opportunity to sell drugs, and I was considering. And then events happened that would show me that this is not me, you shouldn't go this way. So I was, one of the days where I was actually going to make the decision we were sitting at the bottom of the hill, and a few of our friends were sitting at the top of the hill, and they sold to an undercover officer, and they got locked up. And I walked away, and I'm glad that happened that day in that moment, because I never decided to sell drugs despite the opportunity to do so.
So if you can help out a family that's going through transitions from not necessarily the best neighborhoods to the path in which your life took you or led you, what advice would you give them?
It's always this advice. You have to, speaking to parents or to adults, because it's not just parents, it's adults, and we all should be pouring into some person, but you have to give them the message that you do not have to be a victim of your environment. You are who you are, and you have to know who you are. So you have to have conversations with young people, and that's what I do when I develop these relationships. I just sit and I listen to them, and for a while I don't tell them anything. I give them no corrective action. I just listen to them. I build rapport, and then to the point where I finally do share something with them, they're listening. I have their ear. So you want to gain the ear of the young person by getting to know them and just interacting with them. A lot of times, and I see it even with a lot of men do this when they mentor young men, they just start off, boy, pull your pants up. Boy, you know your grades should be better than this. Boy, you know you shouldn't talk to your mother like this. Instead, I ask the questions, you know, why are you talking to her like that?
Right.
Or why are you doing this? But going back to, you know, just my transition, so we talked about me getting into a relationship or meeting God and knowing God. So I went to church with my brother and my sister like maybe 4 days a week. And I got into real relationship with God. I just did not have the scriptural foundation of the word, but I had relationship, and that never went away. Never went away. Even when I went to college, I got into a period where I started questioning doctrine. I started questioning the word. I started questioning, well, why do we have to do this? Not questioning does God exist, but just questioning that. And I didn't get answers that were satisfactory to me. I won't say that I got wrong answers or bad answers. I just did not get the answers that were satisfactory to me.
From other people.
From other people. And so after college, for maybe a good 2 to 3 years, I began to become a persecutor of Christians. I would meet Christians. And so in college, I studied philosophy. So analytical mind, and I love to debate. So I would find out you're a Christian. Ooh. And I would try to antagonize you to no end.
Wow.
So, I mean, there's so much more.
Well, we are just excited about how much you shared, because I know without a doubt that there's someone watching who today has been enlightened, a teacher, an administrator, a parent, a grandparent, a pastor, that you've taught us a lot by sharing about how we can reach our children. And so to the audience, those of you watching, you know, keep praying. Keep praying. And that's what I heard, that the prayers of the righteous availeth much. That families, your family didn't give up on you. You know, even in spite of all that they saw, your stepmom, she presented Christ to you. So just keep praying for our young people and keep presenting them with truth. And that's the word of God, and allow God to do the rest. All right. We're so thankful that you joined us today. See you the next time. God bless and God keep.